Welcome to Drivetime Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on Nett Radio, taking you above and
My
beyond.
people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways. Then I shall hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
Awo, 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 awo. Awo, 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 awo. Kadaya, daya, gadaya, you crying, kadaya, daya, gadaya, because they're coming on the nation. Awo, 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 awo. Awo, 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 awo. Everybody frightened, they're running for cover. No respecter of persons, them bandit, them killer. They raping and looting, they killing you dead, dead. Nobody escaping. Booyaka, bullet in your head. Oh my country, overnight, get so angry, on uptight. I search out the answer, and this is what I discover. Or you push the creator out. You didn't want the name in your mouth, so you take him out of the school curriculum. No knowledge of God for your children. Look around you, all you have is teenage bandits. They might have nothing in it but O's and A's and CXC, but no knowledge of the Almighty. Just because you push the creator out, you didn't want the name in your mouth, so you take him out of the school curriculum. You reaping the fruits of your actions. So tell me, where you balling for? Where are you crying for? Where you balling for? Where are you crying for? Is you who push the creator out. Yeah. Every generation that comes is nothing more than a reproduction of the one gone before. All your double standards and your false value, they come back and catch you off guard and confusing you. What you're seeing is yourself manifesting, nothing else. Check the children's performance and look deep in your conscience. You go see, or you push the creator out. You didn't want the name in your mouth, so you take him out of the school curriculum. No knowledge of God for your children. Look around you, all you have is teenage bandits. They might have nothing in it but O's and A's and CXC, but no knowledge of the Almighty.
Well, everybody, good afternoon to you wherever you may be in this big old universe. We are happy to have you here. Just in case you're wondering where here is, this is New Era TT Radio. And we are streaming to you on newerattradio.com.
Where are you crying for? Where you balling for?
Also on New Era TT Radio, you can get us on TuneIn, so you can get us on all of your smart devices. As we welcome everybody to the Drivetime Exchange with none other than journalist extraordinaire Tony Fraser. Tony, good day to you.
Good day to you, Charlo. How are things?
Everything is pretty all right. We have a full house today.
Today, okay, yeah, I see everybody seems to be there. So we're going to have a good time chatting about matters that you raised in the song, Rush or TI, Teenage Bandits, and how they're living or not living and attempting to make other people live. So the core of what we're going to talk about today is something that was talked about on the campaign platform by the then opposition leader, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, saying that if she and her government were to come into power, they would develop and institute the Stand Your Ground legislation, which is something that has come out of the United States, as I understand it. And essentially it means that people who are attacked by whether teenage or full age bandits have a right to defend themselves in the circumstances. Sounds a little bit like what the Americans talk about with anybody who Israel attacks. They say that Israel has a right to defend itself. And people have a right to defend themselves. That's how the statement goes. So now that the UNC government plus is in power, the intention must be to have the draft legislation developed before it gets to Parliament, and then there will be discussions around it, of course, based on what the legislation stipulates. But we are a little bit far from that. But nevertheless, we feel we have a responsibility to bring information and knowledge and understanding to our listeners and viewers. And so we have assembled a group of people to come and do all of that. I am no expert. I simply ask the questions and ask answers of the panelists. We have Umlala, who's an attorney at law, and I understand that he has been, dealing with the thought. Well, there's no legislation to deal with except outside of the country, but contemplating and searching around for thoughts and ideas on the possibility of the legislation coming forward. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Tony. Good to be here.
Right. Long time we haven't been chatting, but good to see you and so on. I see you still have your hair and all of that. Some of us are losing it quickly, but you still have yours.
Just barely.
Well, we have Vivek Charan, who is the president of the Conference of Chambers. I suppose the chambers outside of the main chamber, i.e. the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Vivek, welcome to the program, and I know you have a perspective on the matter.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm very happy to be here, and good afternoon, everyone, and to all the listeners.
Right, and if you may allow our listeners and viewers to see your face.
Sure, of course. Sorry about that.
Right, I'm sure that you'll be good looking at. Jerry Michael, who is Jerry Michael Goodridge, somebody I associated with when I at Trinidad and Tobago Television, talking about arms and talking about security and so on. He's a security firearms specialist who has done a lot of training in the police service. He has been trained internationally, etc., etc. And therefore, he's here with us this afternoon. So, folks, let us start off on getting an understanding. Let me go to I'm sure that he has searched the legislation where it exists and can give us a sense of the objectives and how those objectives have been achieved over time in the countries in which the legislations have been put forward.
Well, Tony, I think where the deficiency arises is our self-defense legislation creates a strict burden on an individual who exercises the right of self-defense in any circumstance to demonstrate a proportionality in the use of force. And it very often will not extend, or it will not differ from your home or your personal place, your business, your car. It will not be very different than if you're on the street or elsewhere. And very often, if you are charged and you were to use the defense of self-defense, it has to be determined before a judge and jury. Now, we have changes in the laws now. You will probably remember a time gone by, you'd go through a preliminary inquiry, and then there'd be a high court matter, and it would take 10, 15 years. Now they've removed those inquiries, and it goes straight into high court trials. But still a very traumatic, a very long process, very burdensome process. And I think the whole genesis of that is if you were really under attack, genuinely under attack, let's say in your home, or an environment you can consider to be your domain, how do you measure proportionality in an exact way that protects you in terms of being charged? And the example very simply...
Sorry, before you go on, well, if you're giving an example, that's fine, because I wanted you to explain the whole proportionality business. When does a householder have the right, I suppose, to take action against an intruder?
So, I mean, let's look at it from proportionality point of view. If I was attacking you with a stick and you pull out a weapon and shoot me in the ordinary scheme of things, I would have acted using excessive force. And from a proportionality sense, it would outweigh the risk that I face. But you could have a cutlass. I mean, the law used to be, it had to be force for force. So a cutlass met with a cutlass or equal force. But now the test really is, what is the fear you face that causes you to act in those circumstances? So that if you had a cutlass and somebody has a gun and they use it, you are able to defend yourself using what you thought was proportional force. The problem that takes place in any matter, before we even get into stand your ground matters, remember, things happen very quickly. Somebody attacks you, you act instinctively very quickly. Now, when the police investigate it, everything slows down, almost like in frames that have to be examined very carefully. And the police, in making their determination, examine very carefully what you say, what you have done, what witnesses say, to determine in their mind whether they are of the opinion that the self-defense you exercise clears you automatically, or whether it was not necessarily proportionate, or whether it's debatable and ought to be tried before a court. And that's where it becomes gray, because the police are the ones who, in one case, may exercise discretion a particular way, and another exercise it a different way. And where it becomes a little gray is that, well, not gray, where it becomes very difficult is as simply as somebody being shot in the back. So, or not being shot, let's say, in an attacking position, but what appears to be a retreating position, literally negatives your self-defense ordinarily. So what has police have faced it from a very long time now. People running or fleeing, criminals running, might run holding their hand behind their back or facing behind them while shooting. You shoot them in the back, although they have their hand pointed that way. From a forensic point of view, you've shot a retreating man. So it becomes difficult in terms of how the law is applied, how the investigators look at this. And I'll give you some live examples as we go along. But what stand your ground legislation contemplates, and it is very, very clear in the United States, was your level of force that could be used in your house, in your domain, your castle, your environment, ought to be sufficient in any circumstance that you deem fit at that point in time, once you are at risk. So it's not simply somebody thieving mango and you could shoot them from the tree. There still is going to be a burden that you have to demonstrate that there was some level of risk. But it's a lower standard than the ordinary standard that exists today in the common law that deals with provocation and self-defense, where there's almost a burden on you to prove why did you act in that way. And we have seen this debate taking place lately because of the number of home invasions that have taken place, and the violent home invasions, the rapes that have taken place. I've been privy to a lot of people who have been victims, who have advised in one way or another. And when you deal with people who are victims, who are helpless, a man watching his wife or child being raped in front of the entire family, it is very, very traumatic to those people in that environment. And I think largely we have seen the debate coming to the forefront because of where crime found itself, going beyond ordinary robberies that we would have seen years ago, 20 years ago, to a concerted type of crime involving directed, targeted home invasions where people are actually hurt. And I think that's where the debate came about. How do you defend yourself in your home? And as we progress, I'll give you some examples, live examples of home invasions where people have actually used force and been charged.
Okay. What of the variation of standards that are applied? I presume every country does not have the same law and the same circumstances to be fulfilled. to allow somebody to defend themselves and their property and so on. What are there wide variations in the law? Internationally, that is.
The variations are not extremely wide. There's a standard principle of proportionality in circumstances where self-defense, the defenses are usually self-defense, provocation, or in exceptional cases, necessity that are used. So, for example, if you use your wife's firearm and you're not licensed, a defense of necessity might come on because you're using it illegally because you're not licensed to carry it. But the law in whatever jurisdiction, even the US, still looks at the particular circumstances to determine whether or not your exercise was done lawfully or not. So even some of the jurisdictions that have stand their ground, it's not automatically you shoot somebody and you're off. The police still have to examine the circumstances, take statements, make an inquiry, and determine whether or not what you've done is lawful from a stand your ground perspective, you using full force in your home. And if you, for example, in those cases, the police are not satisfied that you have exercised your rights pursuant to the law, they still have the power to charge you, but you still hold the right to use the defense, which is a lower standard than the normal self-defense and provocation that is the law as it exists today.
Okay. I wonder if circumstances of a country can fit into the determination or not whether somebody had the right. And circumstances of a country, I mean, a country is flooded with criminal activity, and therefore the individual in his home is disposed to somebody attempting to kill him, rape his family, etc., etc. Do those matters count at all?
Well, from a strict point of view, a court examining a scenario is not going to look at the level of crime in a country. They have to objectively look at the circumstances and of the event itself and disabuse their mind from everything else. Okay. But the state of a country, the state of a crime situation may sort of influence the way legislation finds itself in the way in which it's drafted. And we see things like state of emergencies coming up where constitutional rights are infringed, largely because the criminal justice system failed to address matters, and then the extreme measures take place. So they do go hand in hand, but the criminal justice system is meant to examine every case on its own. So too the police officers, yes, they know crime is high, they will take it in the back of their mind, but they have to also examine the facts. And very often, I mean, I do a lot of lectures on individuals who are firearm holders, also general public interviews, discussions. People very often in a crisis rush to give a statement, or the police rush you to give statements. And people tend to say things that they ought not to say. Not that it's illegal or wrong, but the English language is a very funny thing. And you could describe something in a way that without being able to be in a calm frame of mind or get proper advice, you could find yourself in a lot of trouble, although you may have a very lawful defense, but the way you're interviewed or the way questions are asked of you, and I've seen this many times before the courts, people get themselves in a lot of trouble rushing to answer, rushing to say things that they didn't properly understand, or the heat of the moment causes them to say something that haunts them for a very long time after. And it was not really what it was meant. But the law, remember, an incident takes place, it takes place in 30 seconds. The law takes 30 hours to examine that exact scenario. So, people, I always advise people, be careful, you have the right of silence, exercise it, know what you're saying, be very cautious. If you're giving a statement, get advice, have a friend, family, have somebody guiding you in whatever scenario it is, whether it's home invasion, whatever it is, be mindful of it, because once in law you commit yourself in writing, you're bound by whatever you say, and it can work for you or against you very easily.
All right, so that's Umlala giving us an indication of some of the elements of the law and what, of course, each country will have their own specific circumstances and needs to put into the legislation when that is so. But Omanala is giving us, or has given us, a sense of the broader picture of this legislation and how it operates and how the magistrates and the judges and so on will make a determination about it. Let's go to businessman Vivek Charan, who I know we had a short conversation, and I know he has a particular position on the legislation. So let's get that general kind of view on the discussion, as it were. Vivek.
Tony, we at the Chamber, we are 100% at the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers. We 100% agree with and support the mandate by this government to provide firearms to the citizens. However, I also feel that in addition to the legislation, the Stand Your Ground legislation, we need to put things in place, or the government needs to put things in place to protect this mandate going forward and to protect the rights of the citizens to continue to be able to have the right to own a firearm. And as it stands now, to get your FUL, first of all, you have to go through a process, provide your medicals and so on. There's also a kind of psychological test that you have to do. And then the police come, they visit your premises, they interview you. If you're married, they interview your spouse as well too. They inspect the premises to see whether or not, you have a safe place to house your firearm. If you're a business person, because one of the previous requirements, as it were, is that if you were more likely to get a firearm if you're a business person transacting in cash, right? Then you get a letter from your bank, issue a bank statement and so on of your business, visit to the business premises to make sure it's legitimate. All these things were done by the police. But what I'm saying is, if the issuance of firearms is going to be wider, or the remit is going to be wider, which this government seems to are suggesting, and which is very welcome by the populace as well, to given years of this build-up in the crime situation. And I echo what Omar said, because I have within our own confederation of chambers, I know many people that have been victims of home invasions. We ourselves have seen the rise of it continually over the last 10 years. And in every single instance almost, the visitation of extreme violence upon the male members of the family has been terrible. It has put people definitively into hospitals, not to mention we read in the papers of elderly people in particular getting targeted and so on. So, people feel that, and the truth is this, right? People feel that I need to own a firearm because the truth is, very often or not, the police only will show up after the event has been done. After the people have left, after the criminals have left, and you're able to call the police is the only time really that the police will be engaged. Very rarely, if ever at all, has the police been there during the actual home invasion or before the home invasion to stop it. So the reality is that calling the police is often an afterthought, but dealing with the home invasion while it is happening or as the occurrence begins, is really up to the individuals in the home or the person who possibly could have the firearm to prevent this from happening. But what we're trying to advocate for is this, that after that entire process of the FUL, of the police doing their due diligence and so on, and the medicals and psychological tests that has to happen is passed by the individual. We feel that after the Stand Your Ground legislation has been passed, as Om has said, there are technical aspects to it. When you apply for a car license, there are two things, right? If you apply for a license to drive.
Okay, so Vivek, that's going to be another part of it when we're dealing actually with the possible measures inside a legislative program that will deal with the different things. Let me go now to Jerry Michael Goodrich, or Michael Jerry Goodrich. I knew him first as
Yeah.
Jerry. I saw Michael coming up somewhere along the line. We always have some second names hanging around, right? Right, Michael, Jerry, which one you prefer me to call you by, Jerry or Michael?
The name Jerry. My name is Jerry myself. So the name Jerry is what you and I know over 30 years.
Okay. What is happening is that we are not getting you very clearly. I don't know if there's a problem there.
Is it?
Are you far from your microphone or something like that?
No, I'm right up on it. Are you hearing me now?
Yeah,
We're hearing you a little better.
A little better now. You just have to probably project a little more.
Well, I'm miles away. I don't know if that is part of the problem too.
You can come a little closer.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds much better.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Yes. Well,
all right.
I've been listening.
Yeah, just before you go in, Jerry, Michael, as I said, I will stick with one of them sooner or later. Is an experienced trainer, somebody who's been involved with security forces, I presume inside and outside of Trinidad, and therefore he has an appreciation of how people act in the situation. So, Jerry, give us a sense of what you think or how you have seen such laws played out in different environments.
Okay, thank you for having me. Tony, first I want to say good afternoon to whom I have not had any working relationship with him, but what he has said, about 95% of it bears fact. But as a force science analyst over the last couple of years, we've gone further into the whole question of the use of a firearm by a fleeing felon or by anybody who wishes to endanger another man's life. And we're not dealing with the physical anatomy of the person anymore. We're dealing with the direction in which the barrel of the gun is pointing, simply because somebody could hide behind, as we say, take cover. A fleeing felon could go behind a vehicle. You won't see his body, you won't see his face, you won't see his back, but you're going to see the muzzle flash of his knife coming from the gun, or you're going to realize that the nozzle or the barrel of the gun is pointing at you. And as long as it is pointing in your direction, there's no more presumption of danger. It is imminent danger. So when we are talking training now, and we're looking at the use of force and in the way in which one will engage, whether a guy running down the road and his back turned to me, as long as his gun, he put his gun under his arm and squeeze off 2 shots, put his hand over his head, facing, as long as you see that front of that gun, making it in common language, the front of that gun pointing at you, that's where the bullet comes from. That's where the deadly force projectile comes from. It doesn't matter if he's sideways, glancing, running, or what. So that is one of the additions to analyzing why you would want to return fire. But there are 2 levels and 2 platforms we have to look at today. One, the civilian platform, the armed civilian who has no, at this point in time, they have no use of force policy in Trinidad and Tobago that will apply to reasonable, direct, and instruct any user and licensed holder of a firearm in the way in which one can carry a firearm, in the way in which he can use it. However, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has a use of force policy, and their policy will mandate how police officers would respond in a situation with reasonable force against the likeness of their peers. So if 3 police officers going down the road in a motor car and 3 of them behave the same way and they engage in a situation, when you have to look at behavior, you look at how the peers or that group would behave based upon their act.
Okay. Seem to have lost Jerry there for a while. Perhaps its internet connection has gone bad. Let's see if he will reconnect in a moment or 2. And if not, we go on to somebody else talking about the issues which they see as being pertinent in the circumstances.
So these
Jerry,
2 points I want to raise.
Okay.
If Jerry's out.
Yes.
Is Jerry back in?
I think Jerry's back. Yes,
Yeah,
okay, good.
Yes, I was finishing. So I was saying that we have two levels to look at and to think legally. One is a control level of use of force, where they have rules and regulations and everything coming into the fray for law enforcement, security, and other people who may be license holders of firearms. And then we have the civilians who their perception of use of force is solely based upon whether or not the antagonistic person create enough fear to make them fearful for their lives or the lives of their family and persons with whom they may work in their business place and otherwise. But there are no parameters written that tells a license holder of a firearm a civilian. So it is now left up to people who are doing training and an interpretation of the history of legal entanglement that one may find. As I agree on that the civilian needs to be counseled and advised, but there is no strict rule of behavior as one may apply to the law enforcement community at this point in time.
Jerry, you have trained a whole lot of people, civilians, police officers, army officers, and so on. Explain to our listeners and our viewers as to how do people approach or think of getting a firearms license? Is it, perhaps even stylistic, that everybody have a gun, so why not? I should have a gun. Or is it fear driving them to that situation?
Is that my question? Because I didn't hear the.
Yes, that's your question. That's your question.
Do you want me to answer that a bit in my area?
Yeah, I want you to answer that.
Okay. What has happened over the years? People have become more and more involved in crime as victims and becoming dissatisfied, as one said just now. The police were never around, and the police were not there to protect, because our system is not like in more developed countries where an officer, you find a police vehicle, a patrol car responding within 3 to 5 minutes of a report. We wait hours and sometimes they say you wait and wait and they never turn up. And a lot of people have become frustrated, and the use of security personnel was a bit cumbersome and costly even to protect one's home, because security personnel were used more in business places. So that on introspection, there was a need now to protect oneself. And that is when they started to think, well, better get a gun because I have to do it on my own. We have a catch-22 situation, not in Trinidad alone, but in the Caribbean. If a group of concerned citizens come together and they decide we are going to protect our district, our village, somehow in the back of the minds of those who are prevailing in law and order think that it's a vigilante group being formed, and these people are going to turn out to be vigilantes, and they are against that sentiment. Yet, the community remains unprotected, because the guns that may have existed traditionally in communities would have been guns in the hands of farmers who got their licensed shotguns to protect their crop in the field, but it never spilled over into personal protection. So the mindset of a lot of people who would have had firearms long ago, it was kept in the home. When they go in the estate, is to shoot the parrot or the squirrel. Trinidad and Tobago has a dynamic and a rapid evolving criminal prevailing mentality now around the dissident. And as a result, we are now forced into looking for an alternative for personal protection. Investments are made in business, and as they invest in your business, people come in to rob you. You build a beautiful home, there are home invasions. You have a nice car, there's carjacking. You have enough money in the bank, there's kidnapping. So everything has changed, and one perceives it as I have not to take the law in my own hand, but I have to take my safety and security in my own hand. And at this point in time, the firearm is the only resolve.
Mm-hmm. You wanted to say something a moment ago?
I hope I remember what I was going to say now.
React to what Jerry is saying. He's saying that the environment of crime is forcing people to want some form of self-defense.
Well, I mean, 2 points I want to raise. You have to also bear in mind that the proposed stand your ground legislation is not only for firearm users or people getting licenses. Those are two separate topics. So we have a government who has said that they're going to encourage people to apply, and they're going to hope that the policy changes in terms of the grant of firearm licenses. That's one thing. But remember, stand your ground. You could have a fish gun, a cutlass, or any other instrument in your house that you can use to defend yourself. That will also form part of what stand your ground legislation intends to deal with. So that it's not, while firearms are glorified, remember, people defend themselves in different ways using different instruments, and the same principles of law apply. That's one aspect of it. And again, firearms, the requirement of firearms, it requires strict conditions to be granted. But once we are intending to move towards this whole concept of stand your ground legislation, it's going to require a lot of education, of informing people of what can and cannot be done.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
You don't want a situation to arise where it's taken out of context and people are hurt, or vigilantes take place and it's taken out of context. It's meant to be used in a very strict, limited way, where there's risk, where there's people who are really in jeopardy and they have to use this. So people get carried away with standing ground. Anybody come in my yard, I can do anything. I'll shoot you, I'll chop you. It's not as easy as that. So since it's very raw in its concept, I would imagine that a lot of dialogue would have to be engaged before legislation is passed, and even when legislation is passed, so that people are equipped with the knowledge of how they're going to deal with things.
Yeah.
And
I think it was quite, sorry, before you go, and I think it was quite dangerous. And politicians on a political campaign, they really have no kind of condition for their mouths at all. The way it was brought up on the campaign, I thought was really irresponsible. It sounded like you have a gun, you will shoot. There was a television show years and years ago about how gun will travel or something like that. It sounded so much like that. You take up the matic and you empty the matic on people and so on. I thought that was quite unfortunate. Perhaps it influenced a lot of people in the wrong kind of way in the circumstances. But Vivek, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Tony, I totally agree with Om. And in response to Mr. Goodridge, the thing about stand your ground legislation is that, you see, it really centers around protecting the individual or the family or the individual that decides to take up some sort of defensive posture against an assailant coming in your property. So it is going to be difficult to sell stand your ground legislation in a wider sense to say, well, let's have a neighborhood protection watch, and then there are people outside of their homes meeting people on the streets of their community or coming into their community. In other words, saying we're protecting the community, but we're walking with concealed firearms or walking. That could lead to, unfortunately, a dangerous situation. What we really want is, we do really need the ability for people to be able to protect themselves in their home, and that's what we're hoping as business people that stand your ground legislation will be. It's not only the home, it's also the business premises, I would believe, right? And then
I suppose anywhere you are,
correct.
Anywhere you are attacked, you have a right to defend yourself in those circumstances.
And then the other thing is that we are thinking that it only has to do with home invasions and stuff like that, when it can actually be in terms of robberies. It could armed robberies and so on. And after gangs, after, let's say, homicides with regard to gangs and so on, that's happening, right? Home invasions, armed robberies. Another growing issue is that of domestic violence, and serious domestic violence where individuals are killed, women in particular. And so we have scenarios where a sister may take refuge in someone's house, away from an abusive partner, and that abusive partner then decides to come to the house to take the sister or the female away, right? Which precipitates violence, and then the response of the you know the master of the house or the individual in the house who possesses, let's say, a firearm, would be to protect his sister from this violence, and then that would then precipitate an interaction, right? So I agree with Ohm where he says that the legislation must be quite specific, but must also be, we feel it must also be broad enough to encompass all the critical situations when it comes to crime. And domestic violence where women are killed is also, something that should be put on the agenda, because then how do these women protect themselves? Time and time again, we see women getting killed because of abusive husbands finding them wherever they are, killing them. The other thing is that, which is nebulous in a sense, is when you dive into actual circumstances of home invasions, you see two things, right? Two things in particular. One is that you are surprised in your house by the sudden appearance of 4 to 6 bandits, right? Which is one scenario. The second scenario is at the entrance of your gate, when you are coming into your gate at night, your automatic gate, or you come out to open your gate to get into your premises, you are also then surprised by assailants. In a situation like that, you may not directly be in your premises when you are attacked. You could be outside your premises waiting to drive inside. So small things like the definition of exactly where your premises lie, and definitions as regard to things like that is also important, because it must also encompass real life scenarios based on the statistics of how these home invasions take place and where the actual conflict or the actual first instance of contact between the bandits and the persons involved or the potential victims occurs. And it doesn't always occur exactly within the house or within the premises of the house. Sometimes it could be on the border.
Yeah, so I suspect that when the legislation is drafted, all of those circumstances will be spelled out in the document. But Jerry, I think you wanted to intervene a moment ago.
Yes, I wanted to say something here, because we are having a conversation here, and it is always nice to be truthful. And the truth is that our community, our country, is not a gun-oriented community. So some of what is being said it is stymied the whole thing into home. But I did part of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service use of force policy, and there's something called weapon of opportunity. And you may be a licensed holder of a firearm, but you have a firearm inside when you wetting your lawn or something, and you have a home invasion, and you may have anything weapon of opportunity. You may be fighting with somebody who's trying to take you back inside to do some harm to your wife and your families and all of that. And if you have a garden fork, it becomes a weapon of opportunity to fight and defend yourself. But with this stand your ground, I think some people don't understand. Stand your ground means that you are taking a position where you can defend yourself with the vigorousness of whether you use a firearm, whether you shout, whether you use saliva, and you stand your ground and you.
Okay, Jerry seems to be having some internet problems there. Hopefully, it will come back in a moment. Just let me inform our listeners.
There is this question of using force in a roadway within 40 meters of a roadway. There's a big problem that our law enforcement community has with that, and we have to get the legislation right. We also have to understand that from a point of view of a force science analyst, it doesn't matter in the home whether it's domestic violence of a male on a female. We have seen domestic violence on females and males too, which are not being reported. So when we have to do something, we have to do it objectively in looking at the law and the whole question of firearms. And what I want to say before we go into another aspect of it, in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean, possession of a firearm is not a right. It is a privilege. And because it's a privilege, it is highly controlled. And it is a contentious thing as to where and how a firearm can be used and not used. And when one stands their ground with it, if you do not have the right ingredient, as Om said, in making a proper report, in writing a statement, and doing different things, that very act of standing your ground can be your detriment. You may have survived the attack, but you may not prevail in court because it does not allow yet for us to readily, as we say, justifiable homicide. Nobody's talking about that. But standing your ground has a presumption in law that it's going to be justifiable homicide if you do take the life of somebody. And I'm not saying with a firearm alone, with anything when you have stood your ground to defend your domain.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we should get from both Om and Vivek a notion of what is stand your ground. And, the assumption is that the legislation which will be drafted here will be on the basis of that phrase, but I don't know if that's a legal phrase upon which the whole legislation can be based. What's the situation? What should the ordinary individual understand by a notion of standing your ground?
Well, before I get into that, I'm gonna give you an example of a case I did recently, which kind of shows where the ambiguity of the law can lead to problems. So I'm representing this individual who's at his home in the country with his wife, child. Here's somebody breaking into their yard and their house, stealing their water pump. We all know how valuable a water pump is. And goes down, armed with his firearm, a very highly trained person, licensed firearm, calls out to the person, listen, desist from what you're doing, words to that effect. The man wielding a cutlass lunges at the gentleman, the homeowner. The homeowner quite rightly fires a shot in the air. Now, mind you, it's dark, just ambient lighting. Instead of the man retreating, he lunges towards the homeowner to chop him. The homeowner retreating back falls on the ground. The man in the melee fires a chop, misses, but literally in the chop spins around, if you know how the body would move. The gentleman fires a shot, shoots him, so the body enters the back at just above at the lower waist and then comes out at the top of the front. So it's a trajectory heading like this, like a 45-degree angle. The man runs away, the gentleman chases him down, gets him, the police come, he subsequently dies. The police encourage him to give a statement. He's in his home, his yard, licensed firearm, they find the cutlass, all the facts line up. Police say, you shot in the back. Despite the fact that there was a fight going on, despite the fact that the trajectory shows you could only shoot like that from a lying position on the ground. He spent 4 years without bail. The judges refused to grant bail. He's a serving man, licensed firearm. We had to spend 3 or 4 years before we could even get a hearing to determine it. Clear case of all the facts that is a case of a man in his home being attacked. But just because, and I understand, I agree with Jerry that in principle and in all common sense and internationally, it doesn't matter when somebody shoots, you shoot back. I have done cases where they're shooting and the bullet enters from the back and they still charge you. So the police very often are not even trained enough in terms of their investigations and charging people. So there are several cases where people have, in the melee of the home, exercise their force and they're charged because you have to now prove, well, why did that bullet, you have to get forensic people now to determine why that bullet went. And although this is in your yard, your house, the cutlass being found, now stand your ground would contemplate situations like that. The presumption would shift. What was he doing in the yard? Was this your home? Were you entitled to use a firearm or not? And again, recently I was doing a case where somebody entered a home, licensed firearm holder. Now there's a gate that separated the upstairs and downstairs. Man huddles his little newborn children into a room, locks the wife in. He's armed. The man is wielding cutlass downstairs. He's deciding, do I shoot? But he's now barricaded by a gate wondering whether the man has a gun, whether he's coming upstairs. But had he shot the man, he would have been charged, given although he's in his house, because the police will say you had a gate. You did not know that he was going to break the gate. You didn't see him break the gate. He didn't shoot you. And that's how some officers are reasonable, and it's all very discretionary. So again, somebody is in your house, you're hiding your wife and your children, you don't know whether it's 1, 5, or 10. How do you determine what force to use? Given the current law, I mean, my advice to anybody is shoot and then ask questions if it's in your house and your wife and child is at risk. But the law could work against you very easily because it does not contemplate situations like this. And nobody's to blame, the police is not to blame. A lot of them need more education and understanding scenarios. But sometimes it goes to the DPP, they look at it in a very, very, very cold way. Well, I don't think it had the ingredients. It had a gate closed there. You should not shot the man, or if the bullet came through the back, I don't know if he was shooting at you. You decide before court, spend 10 years, hire lawyers and figure it out. Now, we have to find a way. How does this legislation contemplate scenarios like this, where the law does not afford you that opportunity?
Right. So, what's a common, easy understanding of legislation which may be titled, may or may not be titled, "Stand Your Ground"?
Well, in the first instance, you have to be very cautious in drafting your legislation. You don't want to open a Pandora's box at the same time and extend it that you stand your ground anywhere, anytime, any place. I think the contemplated intent of legislation of this would be either home, your business place, if you're inside your car, something you possess, control, or have ownership of. It may be a stretch to put it outside in the ordinary circumstances, because the concept behind stand your ground globally, or at least from American point of view, is your home is your castle. You are not, if you're woken up from sleep in your home, you have nowhere to retreat to. You're in your home. You would use the most force possible to defend your home and your family in your premises or in your business place, as opposed to being on the street where you may be able to retreat, where you'll be able to take different measures. And again, we have to be cautious in moving it very slowly ahead, because as Jerry was saying, we're not really a gun culture. We have a lot of education to do, even with firearm users. Many of them, I say it all the time, they're trained properly how to shoot, where to shoot, how to roll, all these things, but they're not contemplating what happens when you shoot. How does the law treat with you? When the police come and they interview you, what are you going to say that satisfies the ingredients that you were really put in fear, and you were not just a really well-trained man who took advantage of a situation? Right. So I think just to summarize, it is really at this stage, in my view, limiting it to things that you have personal control over and not extending it nationwide anywhere, any place.
Right. Jerry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm not putting a plug here, but I'm hearing all that Om is saying, and I realize he has a missing ingredient. There is a scientific and a study that has been over 20 years now. I'm a force science analyst, and all that he is saying that the police will have gray areas and will deal with it long before the matter goes before the court in collecting evidence. We have the old physical evidence, and we also have what we call cognitive interviews now, where even law enforcement officers who have found themselves in trouble using deadly force on somebody may be shot, and it's contentious whether they shot them from behind or in front or all of that. The question of presenting the evidence now, it is no longer a cut and dry. There are many more avenues that one has to investigate. The dynamics of a fight, the body motion, the proximity, the time frame in which we are beginning a little bit scientific here. If it takes somebody 0.5 seconds to pull a trigger, and it takes a man 0.5 seconds to turn facing you and an about turn, when you would have recognized, realized, and you fire that gun in 0.5 second, when you pull that trigger, that man would have really been pivoting. But in the action that is going on, ducking, moving, the bullet goes off. He's struck, and he may be struck while still in the commission of the act of violence, but he may be in a retreating position. But the instrument that he's using, it is still a threat to you. it is still pointing at you. It's like it's a man with a tree canal, and he goes to chop somebody. When that cutlass is coming over his head in a swinging downward motion to
Jerry seems to be losing the internet every now and again. Still there, Jerry? Well, here what we're going to do. In any case, we are due to take a break
and all
and
these
come back.
things we now take into consideration.
Right. Okay.
So it's not just
so we're going to take a break, folks.
This does that.
Yeah. We're going to take a break now and come back to the discussion. So, Chalo, you have the option of exposing the station, the nature of the station. It's a new station, 3 months, going on 3 months of age, as it were. It's completely online and you can get it in several places. And Chalo is the man who knows all about that. Go ahead, Chalo.
Okay, Tony, thank you. Thank you so much. And of course, people, remember you are listening to New Era TT Radio. And we are streaming on newerattradio.com, so you can check us out there. We are very much available to you. You can also get us on all of our platforms at New Era TT. Once you put us into your browser, you will get us on our Instagram feed, also on Facebook, YouTube, as we are taking it live right now, and you can also get us on our TikTok pages. All right, so a number of ways that you can get us, and of course during the morning between 6 and 8 a.m. we stream on M&E TV, where you get us on most of the cable channels also. So there are a number of ways that you can get us, and once you put us in your browser, you're sure to come up with us on New Era TT Radio. All right, so Tony, I have to stay with you at this point in time while I work on some other things.
Okay, all right. So I have it here to my liking, as it were. Then.
Yeah, for
yes?
short.
All right, go ahead. Okay, so we are returning to the discussion, and we're talking about the proposed Stand Your Ground legislation. Don't know if that phrase will be repeated in the legislation, but I suppose the principles behind it having to do with people having the right to defend themselves, and as our panelists have indicated, not only in your home but in various positions, places where you feel threatened, and the threat is real, and the lawyer has explained all about that element. I want to, before we go on, gentlemen, I want to give our listeners an example, and I'm sure that there are examples that Omlala may have encountered, and Jerry and Vivek in their own circumstances. But I spoke with an individual yesterday to get a sense from him. He was attacked. He said, I can say that he's a doctor, won't call his name, of course. And he was attacked by 3 men. He was in his inner office where he treats with patients, and they were in the outer room, and he didn't know them. They weren't patients of his, but he indicated to them that he had a couple of things to do, and he will call them in individually in time. So he went back in his room and did whatever he had to do. But what triggered him? And I know the individual very well, who is, okra with small things like the opening of a door in front of him. I presume that if his receptionist or his nurse wants to get into touch with him, she wouldn't open the door in that kind of furtive manner, but he saw it opening and he readied himself. The outcome was that there were 2 men who had shotguns and a third one who had a pistol in hand. He located his pistol within reach of his body. He was fully trained. He participated in exercises with the army over a long period of time, and he was well versed in shooting. But as he said to me, when this thing happened, and he said incidentally that it took about 5 seconds in that period of time to make a determination on what to do. He thought he would die in the circumstances. I presume two men with shotguns and one other with a pistol, and you alone, and they have the upper hand on you in that they are attacking and you have to make yourself ready to defend. But fortunately for him, because of his training, I'm going to give you the 3 points that he talked about that allowed him to respond successfully in the circumstances. The first one was that he was planning for that kind of activity, in that he had his gun within easy reach of where he was sitting. I think I said he's a doctor. You don't put your gun in front of your patients and so on. So he had it in some place that it would be easy to reach. So it was clearly that he said was a big factor in saving his life. The second thing was training. He emphasized and overemphasized the training. And according to him, his muscle defense in the circumstances simply kicked in. And he was not totally in control of what he was concerned about. As he told me, remember, he's a doctor and therefore he's caring for people and so on. Behind the three men, there was his open room with patients sitting. And therefore he was concerned of missing or the bullet going through some place to hit somebody in the room. And it did. Fortunately, it was a graze on the arm of somebody who was in the outer room. But it was the ability to anticipate. The muscle action was ready to do what was required, and his psychological state was in place. So those were the things which eventually saved him. Two men dead, one other shot and was injured, and the police eventually got him. So that is the kind of situation that is required for somebody to deal with this legislation when it comes, and being a holder of a firearm successfully. I don't know if you gentlemen have had any experiences like the one who the doctor encountered.
You mean Tony, with someone who had a firearm, or just the experience?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, either one. This person, as I said, had his firearm, licensed, trained. He shot with the police and the army and so on. Practice runs wherever they do these things.
Well, I think what one of the issues with that is this is a doctor, so he doesn't really have it's not a situation where he was protecting his goods as much as he was protecting possibly himself from harm when they were coming in. But when you look, Tony, at the people
himself definitely, as he said to me, he thought he was going to die.
Correct.
If you see three men in front of you, all of them armed, two of them with a shotgun.
And that is the fear a lot of people have felt in their own home when faced with home invasions. Now, one of the issues that raises as well too is when you look at the groups of people that are also calling for firearms, right, or FULs, and want to support stand your ground legislation, we're looking at prison officers, one, who themselves are at considerable risk, and two, and who have been killed off duty, going home, in their vehicles and so on. And then we're looking at farmers. Farmers have also been calling for FULs. Farmers are also supporting the stand your ground legislation. But the question is, does stand your ground legislation directly apply to them? So farmers are claiming that, or saying, not claiming, it is true. Farmers are saying that there's a lot of predator larceny. The entire crop been wiped out. They're losing tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes even more. We're looking at livestock. One individual I know in particular, very entrepreneurial, very innovative. He's actually making a lot of things locally and so on. He actually lost cattle amounting to $150,000 a head. And so in a situation like that, you're talking about a farmer wakes up or he gets a call that there are people on his land. He drives down there with his firearm, sees people stealing his entire crop or sees people stealing his livestock, and then decides to fire upon them with his firearm. And you see, therein lies the issue with stand your ground legislation. The government or the government may see stand your ground legislation as the last line of defense between criminals and homeowners or criminals and individuals within a situation where your life is directly threatened. What about situations where you are protecting your livelihood and you fire upon people who are stealing your livelihood? Now let's extend that. Let's extend that to a business. Let's extend that to um, a Chinese grocery, Chinese restaurant, where there have been many cases of burglary. Let's extend that to small retail businesses, mini marts, and so on, where people come in, um, decide to steal things, shoplift, a group of people, they're asked to stop. They refuse to stop. They continue to do it. And then the proprietor or the security guard draws their firearm. What is the situation in those cases? Does stand your ground legislation, cater to those scenarios? If it is that the people continue to steal the items in particular, but offer no direct, let's say, aggression in terms of returning fire or anything like that to the individual. So again, we go to the question of the farmer pulling up on his land. He sees two people stealing two heads of his cattle, or two trucks in which there's been loaded his entire crop for the season, and he fires upon them, but nobody has fired upon him yet. He says, "Stop! Don't go with my crops." The men continue to do so. He fires upon them, hits them, wounds one, maybe kills another. And it's situations like this that, as a business chamber and as the head of a business chamber, I really want fleshed out, and I really want to be able to protect the individuals, because it's not just about it's not just about protecting your life and your family. A lot of criminality actually is making people poorer. A lot of criminality is destroying people's livelihoods, because when your actual goods, when your actual physical assets in your business is being taken and stolen, right? And you already have all these overheads on top of you. You're paying a loan perhaps to the bank already for all these things, $1 million or more that you've invested into your business, or how much money you've invested into your fields or your crop or whatever it is. Bandits then come, steal everything. Are you there just, are you able then to just sit on the sidelines and say, I am not empowered, even though I have a firearm, to do anything here? Or if I do something here and I try to protect my livelihood from being stolen by discharging my firearm, am I then culpable, right? Am I then culpable in the court of law for homicide?
So Vivek, I presume, not I presume, all of the possible instances of using your firearms will be dealt with in the detail of the legislation and whatever accompanying document to the legislation. But I wanted to get at, perhaps Jerry could answer,
Yes.
who have had instances. I'm talking the instance that I talked about.
Good.
How do people react in the? How do people react in those situations?
Properly, and it is one.
Sorry, we lost you again, Jerry. All right. Oh, maybe you can come in at this point in time. I related the story of an individual.
I know we talk about stand your ground dealing with firearms a lot. Remember, it's beyond firearms. I understand Vivek's point, but we'll also have to be, in examining it, we'd have to be very careful of carrying it to the extent of a businessman shooting over somebody stealing their goods, because then it kind of, the law becomes almost at a dangerous level of where do you draw the line. I think stand your ground is really intended where life and limb is at risk, and it has to be done in conjunction with proper policing. We have a crime problem in Trinidad that cannot be fixed by stand your ground legislation. It is a measure that really is designed to protect people's lives, where your life is at risk. the guarding of properties and theft has to be done by the police. It has to be done by the national security. So we have to
The investigation and so on.
while we want to achieve a lot, the legislation has a very narrow purpose. It can't achieve all the goals to stop crime or fix crime in the country. It limits itself. And a point I want to raise that, I mean, Jerry quite rightly is talking about the advancement of forensic and investigations. But unfortunately, I do a lot of cases where the police do not use any of those tools, and people are charged without proper investigations, where defense lawyers have to hire people to come to prove to a court at their cost that the trajectory, the angle, all of these things. So in a hypothetical world, yes, there are all sorts of explanations and training, but in the practicality of policing in Trinidad, investigation and charging, it leaves a lot to be desired. And I'm telling you that from practical cases. I have done multiple cases. Now, scenarios involving guns. Remember, if I draw a gun at you and I have contemplated wrongly and I am not under threat, that is a criminal offense called common assault. Many business people are charged for that on a regular basis. So I think you cuss me and I pull your gun and say, back off. Have I really been at risk in that scenario? And the answer is probably no. And the police can take away your gun, charge you, go before the court. Very often business people or people who are licensed firearm holders, I've done multiple cases, people in jeopardy, fire, shoot somebody, the police arrest you, you spend a night in a cell, you are treated as a common criminal until they have finished their investigation and decide that they charge you, they don't charge you. So all the forensics and the niceties of CSI does not come into play. I've done cases, one some time ago where a businessman, two men came in to rob him, and they threatened, we're going to kill you. And the guys have big clothing and they're dipping as you listen, I'll effing shoot you, this, that. The client, highly trained because he had several robberies before. When the man, they gave them all the money and the fellas were dipping, when I say dipping, reaching for what appeared to be a firearm. Before they pulled it, he shot two of them. It turned out neither had a firearm. Now, ordinarily he'd be charged, but he was very lucky. There was video footage that corroborated what he was saying, and the police, although he was arrested and kept in custody, the video footage got him out. Now, had that been no video footage, he would have been automatically charged because it'll be his word and dead men tell no tales. Again, you don't have the nicety of several witnesses who are going to say, well, I saw you draw, I saw this, I heard you say that. Very often, with the use of firearms, you don't get the opportunity to do very much. I was doing a case recently, again, a businessman doing a charitable exercise in a school, putting in an air condition. Bandits came in. The security guard notified the bandits. He was paying the air condition man. Armed man has his gun. They ran up to him because he was paying the cash in front of his child. The wife, the school attendants pointed the gun at the man. The man is begging, pleading. Boss, look, I'll give you, I only have $1,000. The man pulls the trigger. The gun sticks. He then takes out his gun, highly trained, but in the melee, shoots 3 times, hits the guy, but the guy runs away. All the blood is left there, the gun. The police arrest my client, take him into custody, and he's the criminal. Now we have to get witness statements to prove that although the gun was pulled, the gun is found there, there's blood there, wrong, arrest the man, he has a criminal record. This man is now traumatized, locked up. He goes to the ID parade. The family are let in the ID parade and said, listen, you shoot we people, we go deal with you. So there's a lot of dynamics that goes on in the place that the public is unaware of. And again, it has to also be training of the police, the legislation, training of firearm users, and also public general training of when you come into my house, where are my limits? Because you don't want vigilantes, you don't want people going outside of what should be law to protect law-abiding citizens and using it as weapons against innocent people. So it's a very, very cautious exercise, and a lot of this maybe the stand your ground legislation is important because it is going to create a public debate where these things have to be discussed, ventilated, and dealt with in a way that we can probably get a peaceful environment where the law operates in the way in which it should, the police operate the way in which it should, and hopefully people will not have to even carry firearms or have to exercise the legislation that is put in place. But it's going to be a collective arrangement of all players. This is not empowering one group of people and saying, well, we feel you're a victim, go forth and shoot. This is how do we create the balance? Because you're going to find people slipping through the cracks. You're going to find cases where you see it in the US all the time where somebody comes and rings the doorbell and they shoot them from inside and say, I thought you were a bandit, and the person was unarmed. So again, it's going to have to be very carefully managed in a very emotional time where people are terrified. People want guns not because they want the responsibility. I mean, you have those who want a gallery having a gun, but having a gun is a major liability. The training you have to
I agree with that 100%.
That is something. Don't rush to get a gun. There's no joy in carrying a gun. A gun is the biggest liability you'll have in your life because when you pull
that's an element. That's an element that we're going to talk about in a moment, because there is a fear in the society that if you spread guns around, perhaps indiscriminately, perhaps without rigid, examination and control before you issue licenses. Some of those guns, many of those guns may end up in the wrong hands eventually. But Jerry, are you there? Are you back with us?
Here. I'm here.
I want you to. You heard what I said about that individual who shot the three bandits who came to rob him and whatever else, and he thought in the circumstances that he was dead. And what I'm getting at, and he still is a highly trained person who was involved in competitions, etc., etc. And in the circumstances, he was in a very difficult situation. And let me give you a sort of him. I know the individual quite well, a very confident and so on individual. And when I was speaking to him yesterday, must be more than 15 years away from the event, he had problems because I suppose more so as a doctor, taking a life is not what he's supposed to do. And I always think of myself in such a situation. If I have a gun in my hand and a bandit, I don't know if I could shoot to kill him. Maybe some kind of reflex action will come. The point I'm making, Jerry, and to everybody else, is that it is not simple in the circumstances for somebody to react.
Yes, I wanna back up and then I'll deal with what you just said. The reason why police will have dealt with and will continue to deal with certain persons who use their firearms, and we spoke about the businessmen who are involved in the agribusiness and all that. The firearms application form is a very interesting piece of punitive document, and I say that because if you don't write up your application properly, you are a farmer and you apply for a firearm, and the firearm would be for the protection of the crops while still growing against pests, right? So you're talking in terms against the parrot and the squirrel and the monkey and all that. That firearm, if and when used and you appropriate a defensive position, like your field is ready for harvest and you sleep in your field during the night and people come on the field and you defend yourself. Of course you can defend yourself, because you would have challenged these people who have no authority to be on your land, in your garden or in your property, and one would understand the dynamics of protecting it by challenging them. And when you present yourself in a challenge, it is now in a closer proximity, coming up against persons who may be armed otherwise. And when I use armed, I don't mean armed with a firearm alone. Some people go there with a spear gun or fishing gun, whatever. They may be armed because they use anything as a weapon. When you confront that person, you have all right to defend yourself at that point in time. You're not eradicating the things that interfere the pest, but the application, it also goes like this. A person who is hunting their firearm that they have license to hunt is not a 24/7 firearm. It comes out during hunting season to go shoot animals. So you find some persons who have license, they would say, I have a license for my shotgun for personal protection and for hunting. I have a license for my shotgun for taking part in trap and skeet shooting and maybe hunting. But the classification of those firearms are so different sometimes that they don't work in each situation. So I would like to cover that, and sometimes this is why you may have a problem. But if you are a farmer and you have a personal firearm and a shotgun, it gives a clarity as to why you would have possessed the shotgun. To deal with the pests, and the handgun would be for personal protection. And wherever you take your person, and there is an indifference to civil behavior, then you can protect yourself against whatever levels of violence is being brought to you. And the highest level one says that you can deal with a firearm is when your life is threatened. Now, how long does a threat last? I have dealt with a situation already where the threat lasts just about 5 seconds. And in that 5 seconds, the person could have been shot, but the response would have been different. And in another situation, a threat may last for 5, 10, 15 minutes if they are in your home. But it is not a home invasion alone. We work on the sympathies of people and the emotional stuff. The violence that we are experiencing in Trinidad and Tobago now for any armed person, and I would like to just go back on something. A police officer many years ago didn't think it fit to go to church with his firearm. He left it home. And right there in the home, one of the family members shot another one. They were young children and they found his firearm. Now, the reason why he didn't take it to church, because he didn't think it was, the right thing to do. And a lot of people who have firearms, there are doctors who have firearms and they don't take it to their office. There are people who have firearms and they do different things. Your friend you would have spoken of would have had the presence of mind to know that his firearm is a personal choice for his personal defense. However, when he's in his office, there's an extension of that responsibility and commitment to protect the lives of his agents, his clients, his tenants, and anybody under whose jurisdiction it will fall. That he may have that commitment to protect them, himself and the other people. In so doing, when he would have been confronted, the reasoning and the power that one would have to assume to defend yourself with a firearm, there is what we call a split-second decision. Do I get involved with this or do I don't get involved with it? What is going to happen? The sad thing about it is the police in Trinidad and Tobago, many of them, because I deal with it, I came out to the law enforcement, I joined the police service. Many of us then were of the belief that the only people who had an authority in using a firearm in any community was police. It has extended now to a greater number of people in the community, and there's a lack of communication and concentration in delivering information that will alleviate the fear, the anxiety of a license holder to know whether they're doing the right thing, yes or no, because there is a lack of communication in what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing when it comes to justifiable homicide.
Yeah.
And
but Jerry,
and that is where Om and myself we could talk, because how do we justify when he says just now that when the man fired there was no gun? When I was in training, or if I go back to my notebooks as a recruit, they said from the time a man says this is a robbery, give me your money or whatever, and he has his hand on their shirt, it doesn't matter whether it's his finger, a gun, a knife, or a fork under his shirt, his intention and his utterance says, this is a robbery, I will shoot you, I will do this. You have all right to use your firearm to defend yourself. You don't have to have proof that it was a gun under his shirt. I don't have X-ray eyes. I have fear, and he has brought on the fear of my life by his utterance. And I can tell you, anybody who has that situation, we know what to do. We know how to deal with it. And there is this little gray area. But the law enforcement community now find itself in the same malady because a lot more police officers now are being granted their own personal firearm. And they too cannot yet comprehend and handle close quarter conflict and confrontation in whether they use the firearm, yes or no. We
Yeah.
saw two
Jerry,
situations.
I want you to talk. I want you to talk a bit about from the position of the individual who has a firearm and has to defend himself or herself and the family and so on, as outlined earlier by Uh,
Good.
the psychological
Exactly. The person
process.
who is in
Hold on.
possession.
Hold on. The psychological process the individual has to go. This person is not a bandit who accustomed shooting people and so on, but you have a gun and fears have been raised about you have a weapon in your hand, but you are unable to use it, notwithstanding the fact, like my friend who was very well trained and accustomed to shooting off a gun, but he's shooting it at targets, not at people.
Right. That processing is done during the training, during the initial introduction to what it is in your hand and the reason why you have it. And I'll make the distinction. If he joins some shooting club, the firearm in his hand, the eventual goal is to shoot as many 10s in the 10 ring that he or she can because it's recreational. If you have a firearm for personal protection, it may be used not even in such a concise aiming way, but to deliver the bullet to cause dysfunctioning, to stop the threat immediately or otherwise, in the shape of a target that is of the threat. And only human beings, the anatomy, the shape of the human anatomy is the target that one should concentrate on. And no definite area, but the center of mass where we understand all those things that we happen to incapacitate the body, the central nervous system, the heart and everything. That is true training. When you bring somebody into the fray of owning a defense firearm, they have to deal with that reality. When that body punctures that exodermis, it is going to bleed. And when it bleeds, you're going to have blood in your environment. It's not a clean thing, it's a nasty encounter. But at your earliest stage, in introducing the person so they understand that they're playing mass and you can't freight powder. So the mental and the mindset begins at that point in time, understanding that a firearm is a deadly force instrument of which you are in control of yours. You have no control of the other person who is the aggressor. And it can do the same thing. It's an equator, and you must train to bring time, effort, response, muscular movement, and rational thought behind using this firearm. That is the only thing that's going to make you, the winner in that confrontation. And you have to, as you said, your friend, you have to role play, mental role playing, physical. Develop your physical attributes, your mental role playing. If this, what that? If this, what that? I lost a friend who, and a lot of license holders of firearms do this. They get into the vehicle, and where they normally would carry their firearm on their person, they remove it from there and put it under their leg while they're driving because they think if something happens, I can't get to my gun at the immediate moment that I may need to use it, and they put it under their leg. And you have to tell them, no, you have to build this routine. Build this routine. When you go home, pretend you're in the car, sit on your chair, carry the firearm where you were training with it. Learn to draw it, learn to extend your arm or keep your arm closed. A lot of prerequisites for delivering a defensive position. It is not as easy as it is because the mind begins to work against the body too, because we are not killers. We are not killers. We are not in a society where we have tribal wars and all of that. We're in a society where we want to work hard, enjoy our income, live with our families, and enjoy a quality of life. But this is now being imposed upon us. And the criminal activity, the imposition forces us now to get
another example. Let me give another example that I witnessed as a reporter. I was then at TTT. And we got a call from somebody who said to me, I didn't know the person, that Selwyn Richardson is dead in his garage. So off we went. And we got there even before the police got there. And Selwyn Richardson was sitting in his car. The door was open. And you could see clearly that he had strapped onto his lower leg a revolver, pistol, whatever it is. but he was dead. And so the indication is that even remember, he was a police officer, he must have trained and so on. He had the firearm, but he was not able to use it in the circumstances. So I'm getting at that point that even with trained and experienced persons, it could be a difficult situation to pull out your firearm and shoot somebody.
Yes, and you brought Selwyn's name into the frame. That is very nostalgic for me because he was the minister who went at lengths. He got a senior army officer to test me on the range on the 11th of June 1990 to see what I was talking about, because it was a new thing I was talking about: mindset, psychomotor skill development, multiple shot placement and all that. And he was hearing that, and somebody reported me as this young man who is into talking about guns, and Selwyn said, well, we know how to do something, what it is you all about. And we did the testing, and I got my approval from the Ministry of National Security after I was tested. But yes, firearm preparedness is also where one will have to understand, how do you dress properly for it. Ankle holster was something that a lot of people carried because it was someplace to put the gun to walk around with it. But in today's world, we're talking about quick, definite use of a firearm. So we're talking about shoulder holsters where people use it under the jacket or on their pants waist. We've seen our law enforcement officers working with low-ride holsters and all of that. And all these different positionings do not dictate the urgency of getting a firearm out and using it if you have to. And civilian use of a firearm is totally different from law enforcement. Yet, our behaviors are going to be judged by the knowledge, the finite, not the infinite, the finite knowledge that police officers have in understanding use of force and firearm. So that advocating for a development of a use of force compliant and review unit or board will further speak to the deliberations that we're having here today. How many different situations may appear for one to defend oneself, and to do so without even having witnesses. So the whole question is, you and I may be going out somewhere, we both you are the driver of a car and I'm a passenger, and we are stopped on the road and we realize that it is a carjacking or robbery going to take place. How are we going to deal with it to survive the trauma? If we don't act quickly enough to draw that firearm and tell them, hey, stop, don't come no further, because they're coming up upon you on the car. Now, when said, yes, somebody drew a firearm and they were charged with an assault with a weapon, what the police in a lot of jurisdictions abroad know, and what our officers may have to learn and contend with, is that a firearm is not only used for shooting, because their mantra was, the firearm know when in order and you shouldn't be drawing it for any purpose but for firing it. But there is another aspect of it. If you are a licensed holder of a firearm and more than two people come at you, there's what you call proximity, that's called size, it's called interrelation of the sex. If you're female and you're accosted by men, if you have more than one or two or three people coming at you, you're already outnumbered. And these are the ingredients that are ready to instill fear in you. You may draw your firearm to protect yourself. You may not have to shoot because of the draw it. They may turn and run and flee. But there are a number of things, as I said earlier on, we are not a gun country, and there are so many prevailing factors that would allow a person to defend themselves during reasonable time.
Right. Let me go to Lala, the attorney.
Use of force.
Okay, let me go to Lala, the attorney, to comment on those situations, including the individual who has a firearm, a licensed firearm, and a precious situation comes upon him or her, and it might be difficult to carry out your training and act in those situations.
It is so true, and sometimes the window of opportunity may never exist for you to use your firearm, because there's the element of surprise And we know today that a number of these men are not just working on a spontaneous. They are what they're doing. They're doing reconnaissance on people. They have now, and I say it all the time. You have a higher education on the street now because of people who are coming back home. People are influencing behavior.
I agree with that. I think that is really the case.
Okay. All right. So let's go to I want to bring Lala into this discussion at this point. Go ahead.
Sure, no problem.
Well, I mean, we have to look at it from the point that a lot of people who carry firearms are trained. I think there's a culture among firearm users to engage in training, but very often scenarios are not what you trained for, from the point of view that it is always close quarter sudden attacks. Very often also armed bandits that come, it's not one man coming to shoot you. So very often it's 3 or 4 all armed at the same time. So again, it is always scenario sensitive. And it also, that hesitation for a moment to shoot somebody could be the determination of your life and death also. Because remember, while you're shooting at targets in your train, draw, shoot, remember that split second in your mind where you think, should I am going to take a life or not? It's a very critical decision-making process. And this is very different from, again, stand your ground legislation, which is really something separate and apart in terms of dealing with one of the defenses available for the use of defense, not only firearms. So firearm use is very fact sensitive. And we come back, Jerry's talking about, yes, he's right in principle on the gun use of common assault, where you can use it, you can draw people off. But I've done many cases where people have been threatened, approached by a group of people, and then they go to the police station and say, well, this man tried to shoot 3 of us. There are 3 statements. And you are there saying, well, no, I just try to defend myself. So everything is all very fact sensitive when it deals with firearms. And that's why education is so critical in terms of understanding the landscape of what you can and cannot do. And again, no amount of legal firearms training is going to prepare you when the incident takes place. How do you describe the words that were used to you, the movement, the scenario, everything else that allows you to even exercise provocation, self-defense, or if they stand your ground. So you could do everything right on paper, forensically, but if your statement and your narrative does not support what really is a defense, you're going to find yourself in problems. And remember, most of these scenarios, there are very few witnesses, if any at all. Very often, no camera is going to pick it up, late night, dark, and it's left to the police to exercise their discretion how they're going to treat with you. And very often, a lot of the people who do all the training in the world have no clue how to answer the police when the crisis takes place, or even from a home point of view. There are repeated cases where people make mistakes, not deliberately, not dishonestly, but it's just a misunderstanding of things. And again, our goal as a country shouldn't really be to have everybody trained as mercenaries to protect themselves. It should be the responsibility of the police service to ensure that the criminal element that has caused us to reach this situation are dealt with. And although if stand your ground legislation is passed, it is so infrequently used, that should be the order of the day, because you don't want to get in a situation of a gray area. Right now, I think stand your ground, because it's lobbied around so much. The layperson thinks you enter my yard, I could kill you and I'm all right, I'm good. That's what it means. This is a very technical piece of legislation that's contemplated, and it's very important. Yes, people who train in firearms every day understand, police understand. I've represented many police officers who've gotten themselves in trouble with firearms also, and you assume they're trained. But again, we have to tread very cautiously, because you don't want people misunderstanding where this direction is going to go. Because you in your mind can think you're under threat, but the police are going to look at the narrative and see whether they felt you were acting reasonably or not. And then you end up charged before the court for a very long point in time. I've dealt with a lot of people who have had to face the court for years, innocently in my view, but the system just really didn't understand it and treat it properly. So again, we have a lot of development to do with this legislation that is contemplated. And hopefully the dialogue will change the way we see things, bring greater understanding, and not create vigilantism, not create unlawful killing, not create recklessness, but understand that this is last resort measure. The pulling of a firearm is last resort measure that you have to contemplate in your mind. This is life and death. I am exercising this right because I'm well aware that this is my only option.
How do you respond to the concern that is spread abroad that allowing a whole range of people to get a firearm license and therefore firearms can be a means of putting firearms in the hands of bandits who invade your home, and before you have time to do anything, they're up on you and demanding the firearm that you have. Is that a real possibility that we should be concerned about?
Well, first of all, the grant of firearms has to be a very carefully managed exercise. Right now, there's a stringent process of investigations and a number of documents that have to be satisfied. So not everybody, not like the US, you can go with an ID card and get a gun. You have to fulfill certain requirements. And one of the requirements is you have to justify why do you want this firearm. You can't want it because you just want to protect your house. There must be a rationale that justifies the police to even grant you it in the first place. Now, bear in mind, we are already at a situation where the guns that are illegal probably outnumber the guns that are legal in the first place. And again, as Jerry is a competent trainer, would train his people, a firearm becomes a part of your anatomy. Firearms aren't to be left all over, left in your house. That's why a firearm is a major liability. So you have to be trained, if you want to carry a firearm, to fulfill the criteria that puts you at such a high level of responsibility that you will not find yourself in that scenario. And if people are properly trained, if the law contemplates that level of protection for firearm users, then it is unlikely that the bandit is going to want to venture into somebody's house and look for firearm, because they're going to be on the back foot. Which house, who has guns? I think it would create a greater level of fear in the minds of the criminal element trying to take away licensed firearms from people. But again, it comes back to that training, that education, that knowledge that once you're entitled to carry a firearm, with it comes great responsibility that can only come with that training, that education, and that understanding that allows you to know that if you lose your firearm, it's like losing a limb. It's as simple as that. You can't leave it lying around, can't leave it accessible to your children, you can't leave it accessible to other people. There's a lot of responsibility.
Can't go carnival fed with it.
Yeah. So there's a charge for that, isn't there?
Yeah, there are charges. Anybody who, if you recklessly leave your firearm unattended, if somebody else uses your firearm, it's illegal transfer of a firearm. There are a whole host of laws that deal with it. But once we venture in that area, you see, we've allowed crime to get to a situation that it is such a level that it's uncontrollable. So you are left with a position. It's not I don't imagine stand your ground legislation is a desirable approach, but it's no alternative approach. It's reached a position that unless you have dealt with people who have been the victims of home invasion and raped and abused and shot and chopped in their home, only then you understand what it feels like. And it is creating almost a balancing exercise in a very unfair environment where law-abiding citizens feel the law does not protect them. And it's creating that sort of balancing that allows law-abiding, that level, if even psychologically, to protect themselves from that element that has grown way beyond where it should be at this point in time.
Vivek?
I would like to, there's a very enlightening discussion. We have on one side, we have Om, who has actually defended people who have used their firearm and has given us the legal perspective of standing ground legislation. We have Jerry, we have Michael, who is an expert trainer and an expert user of firearms. I stand in my position as one of the groups that have been very vocal about wanting this FUL system and wanting firearms to once again be made available. And the reason for that is the number of of very brutal home invasions, the amount of people, business people that have been killed. Many home invasions don't hit the papers, and people don't want to talk about it because of the trauma. What I have to say is that how do we, and it's very important to know, that's why this discussion is is so enlightening. It's very important that upon any new user of a firearm or any new person that's been granted an FUL license, to understand the responsibility placed upon them is an increased one and a grave one at that. And how do we do that? And that's why, from the perspective of the head of a business chamber, I wanted to, I'd really like to advise that in addition to the existing, due diligence done by the police, that a knowledge of the law with regard to usage of your firearm is incredibly important. How can you have a firearm, right, and not understand what are your limits and boundaries with regard to its usage? How can you have such a, you have a dangerous thing, and you might know how to use this thing by going to a range or so on, as is mandated when you get your FUL for 2 weeks or for the particular course, and then but you don't know the law as pertains to its usage, right? So that's one aspect. That after you get after the police do their due diligence, that you sit a regulations exam, the aim of which is not to fail people, but the aim of which is to show that you grasp the concepts of the law pertaining to your usage of the firearm. In certain situations, and what those boundaries would be. Secondly, when I listen to Michael, the other aspect of responsibility of your firearm is about competence. How can you have a dangerous thing like a firearm be granted granted the ability to carry this, have it in your home? There's a law now that the stand your ground law allows you to use it in specific circumstances, let's say. But what is the level of your competence? The idea of this is that in addition to after due diligence, after you sit the provisional exam, after you've been granted your firearm, that there's also, that we would like to make a recommendation that the system of, let's say, training or competence be something that is tested on a yearly basis. That you go into a range which you are registered in, and that you have to show your competence with the weapon, because the reality is, despite all the crime situation is and all of that, there is also the situation where you can be granted your FUL. You get a firearm, you own a firearm now, you go to the range once or twice, and then it sits down there and you never use it again for months. And then when an incident happens, you pull it, you're unable to use it. Two, you make mistakes with it, and it could hurt yourself, it hurts a member of your family instead. Or three, your fares so much because at the point in time you're not comfortable enough with your weapon. And comfort with your weapon, from other experts that I have spoken to, is key. And comfort with your weapon only comes with competence, and competence only comes with training. So if we really want to be as responsible as we can with this, then it's not simply a question of let's give out FULs, let's have stand your ground legislation and leave it there. If we are to ensure that people understand the responsibility placed on them, that Om was talking about, then we have to have a system where they must understand the law. And the only way to get them to understand the law is that they sit a small exam, as we do when we go in for a license, and we show a basic understanding of the law as it stands, and then we go forward to say, have you passed this? This shows that you understand. Secondly, the question of competence, which is competence with your weapon, cannot be a one-time thing. It has to be, okay, you have shown competence with your weapon, so now we grant you your weapon, you can go out there. But then I do feel that on a yearly basis, there needs to be an examination of where that competence is, which guides people gently in the direction of staying in touch with their range and continuing to take expert instruction, which only helps with their responsibility the overall responsibility of owning a firearm, rather than
Okay,
it
so
getting
gentlemen, we have to wrap now. We had a long discourse, and clearly it is an indication that there are a whole lot more things to be discussed, and we are glad to have opened the batting with something of a varied discussion on the whole legislation. What are the things? There are going to be a lot of discussions on the basis of what are the elements of the election, of the legislation that will be put together. We thank you very much, Lala, Jerry Goodrich, and Vivek Sharon of the business community for coming and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Tony. Good evening to Trinidad and Tobago.
Right, Chalo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony, and of course, thank you very much to your guests passing through this afternoon. Remember, there's a rerun of this program tomorrow morning at around 8:20 a.m., so you can check it out there. And you will also be able to go up to our YouTube channel, newerattradio.com, where you'll be able to listen to the entire interview all over again whenever you're ready. All right? Keep it here on New Era TT Radio.
I know the gun don't have a mother, and you know the gun don't have a father. Man, all they do is place the finger on the trigger, and it came here to cause big disaster. Destroying the world. Yes. Corrupting the world. Yes. Oh yes. You never know that the gun came on a mission. It came to wipe out God's creation. But they claim it was never the intention. But today, look at what is going on. You Mr. Gun, you need my attention. I have to start educating my children as early as primary level, and let them know you belong to the devil. These people with their weapon factories putting too much tears to our families, and our children is falling victim. We got to do something to stop them. Yes. Destroying the world. Yes. Corrupting the world. Oh yes. Oh yes. Cause when the mission of the gun is accomplished, there'll be no more life on the earth. Yes, when the mission of the gun